Now, before I introduce our next and final speaker of today, who has the unenviable task of trying to marshal all of the stuff that we've heard over, and I'm sure that's a technical term, all of the stuff, all of the fantastic information that different speakers have imparted on us. We've heard the name Landmark used a lot today, and that's fantastic, great, and thank you for your kind words, Kate. This is absolutely not about Landmark. We were privileged to work with Social Enterprise UK, and when we had a discussion about what can we do next, how can we help, this hearts and minds philosophy, the mind said do something, the Social Value Act was coming, you got involved, the heart then starts to pull the mind, and the mind says in a corporate space sometimes, well, keep this private, this is yours, you can use this is a bit of a unique selling point, you can get ahead of the game. Absolutely, that is the antithesis of what social value creation has to be about. It has to be about learning, about sharing, about networking. So we were delighted to get involved with Social Enterprise UK and have this opportunity to help host this event. I've learnt a fantastic amount today, and it makes the environmental pillar of sustainability look so easy, doesn't it? Because it's just a little bit, but it's a bit of easy metrics. When Kate was talking about different communities and different councils and different organisations, their need for social value is different in every instance. Therefore, what you've got to offer is different in every instance. How it will be measured and evaluated and tracked will be different. So it's not just an elephant in the room, it's a herd of elephants. And I think tomorrow, if we're not going to get stampeded by that herd of elephants, we'll need to just rein it back into some fairly focused activities, to some tangibles that we can help particularly Chris White move the Social Value Act ahead. So our final speaker for today is Nick Temple from Social Enterprise UK. Delighted to have you with us here today, Nick, and I don't envy you, as I say, your task at all of trying to wrap all this up. I will then just spend a moment closing today's events and ending the web stream by the tug of the ear, but I won't do it now, otherwise catastrophe will reign. I'll give you the clicker. I'm not sure if it's going to be any use to you.
I can try.
But anyway. Use your mind.
Yeah.
Power of mind. Kate, show us that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll start by saying I'm actually not going to be the final speaker. I know, in a shock bit of news to our MC who doesn't know that, but Vaughan Lindsay, who's the CEO of Dartington Hall, has actually arrived and will speak just briefly after me about the reality of actually what it's meant for Dartington, whether the Social Value Act has had real input, before we go on, obviously, to the delights of enjoying Dartington Hall later on this evening. So I'm going to try the clicker, and I'll do that. There we go. So Social Enterprise UK, as the name would suggest, is the national body for social enterprise. So we seek to represent and advocate for the wide range of social enterprises across the UK. Many behind us, many in the room. We've heard already mention of Bellew, there's Cosmic, Real Ideas Organisation, Fusion 21, CAN itself, and Dartington, and many more. And actually what a lot of our members have told us for the last few years is, actually, yes, investment's important and support is important, but actually, Nick, what we really need is customers. And actually, we need to be able to win business to make our businesses sustainable. So actually, SE UK, whilst building the evidence base and lobbying politicians and doing all the things we do, also seeks to be a market builder now. And that was really what we've started to do more over the last few years. So there are some big markets for social enterprises. The public sector is one, and that's really why we started to talk about the Social Value Act. It's why it was put in the manifesto in 2010, which Chris White signed up to and then happily won the ballot, as you heard earlier. And now also we're forming a social economy alliance which seeks to influence policy, and the recommendations from tomorrow will be able to fed straight back into that. Also, we work with the private sector, and our Buy Social campaign is seeking, again, to encourage the private sector to buy from social enterprises. Again, you're seeing some of that in evidence today. But finally, also the general public are a big market too, and actually the main source of income above and beyond the public sector for social enterprises. So we're seeking to raise awareness to that market so they can understand it better too. So that's the kind of context behind why we got involved in the Act. It was really about creating a favourable environment for social enterprises. And that's why we've got involved in today's summit. And I'd really like to thank you all for coming. and in advance tomorrow for your contributions, and for those of you who've made contributions today. I suppose I'm going to whiz through and attempt to summarise the reflections and key points so far, so stick with me as we race through. So we started, for those of you who were there and remember, with Chris White, talking about the fact there was no real limit actually to the potential of the Act, and particularly focusing, I think, on how we could raise awareness and make that potential known, which I think is the first step actually to realising it. Andy actually, in what he called his filler moment, I thought actually made some really great points about the comparison to sustainability and where social value can try to get to in terms of becoming embedded in the mainstream and the persistence and actually commitment we need to have to make that happen. Jane memorably put on her glasses and talked about the experience of measuring the triple bottom line, how the social was arguably the most difficult. But actually also the glasses were about how the reporting can help them in practice internally and not just in their external reporting. It helped them see things differently and particularly how things were interconnected. Tim then spoke, and apart from revealing an hitherto unknown love of Women's Own, also talked movingly and passionately, I think, about the responsibility of business and the opportunities that that presents as well. And again, how social capital can be a means of making decisions. And I think also actually tying it to the personal, in terms of your daughter being your mentor, is really important to remind us of why each of us as individuals within organisations is involved in this agenda. Simon from the Forestry Commission, I think, gave a really interesting, different perspective on coming out of the public sector and how do you build this stuff in right from the start. How do you really think about how you embed it and challenge? And he talked a lot about his stakeholders. And I think I'll come back to that, and we'll come back to that increasingly tomorrow about how you engage those stakeholders and encourage them and engage with them to hold you to account. And then Matt gave us a whirlwind tour of the global context. My Icelandic colleague Olof particularly delighted at the mention of the Icelandic constitution. But I think the transparency, trust and technology not only changing things and changing the environment we live in, but also those three being the potential of the solution as well. And the fact that we are making progress. So there's, someone always says to me that social accounting is kind of 250 years behind financial accounting. I think we're catching up rapidly, and it feels like the progress is swift, but we have much more to do. And getting into the detail, as Matt put it, is a lot of what we'll focus on tomorrow. And finally, Kate really gave us the realities of the commissioning environment. Delighted she started with a service user, and actually looking at all three sectors and the challenges they face and how they interrelate, how they can help your business, regardless of the sector, and also the fact that we need to always think about ownership and accountability. I suppose there's a few things I felt we hadn't covered, and we'll get into some of that tomorrow, I suppose. Some of the trade-offs and complex linkages between the pursuit of different outcomes, the real translation to delivery and implementation on the ground, and how we really achieve that, either in commissioning or in provision. And also the barriers, actually, which are sometimes regulatory, they're sometimes process, they're sometimes people. Not every organisation is lucky enough that its group CFO is also its head of sustainability. And how do we tackle and work with those organisations that sometimes have people that we need to engage on that? And not only that, but when they're engaged at the top level, how do we ensure we can cascade that back down through an organisation to ensure they all understand what the organisation is trying to do? Before I hand over to Vaughan, I just wanted to share with you, we've done a little bit of research in advance of today with NCVO and also the LGA. And just to give you some headlines on that to feed into tomorrow's work, because you will be working, we asked them, our survey said, guidance, 31% of commissioners feel it's lacking, but providers, actually even more, so 51%. So actually there's a real need for guidance around the Act. Potentially that could be statutory, potentially that could come from some of the bodies in this room, but there's still a need, despite the various guides and methodologies and so on that's out there, that we need to address. I'm not even going to bother with the clicker. Commissioning and procurement, this was quite interesting, with the caveat that this was a bit of a self-selecting bunch. But we actually found 81% acted, or had acted to identify at least their social value priorities, which is a good start. I think you may be surprised by the level of that number. I think it may be much lower in some areas of the country. And actually that 7% had their organisation, their commissioning organisation, had issued tenders using social value criteria. So we're starting to see high take-up. That number, again, I think we see varying wildly between different areas, depending on the local authority, depending on the commissioning, depending on the central government department, and so on. But at least some good signs that we're seeing, and potentially options. Do we always have to wait for the contract to come out? Can we do that retrospectively? And the next, I haven't got that many, it's all right. So on measurement, we switched to the providers, and actually 75% were saying they were measuring their social impact. That's good. There's still room for improvement, obviously, about 25%. But actually what was interesting was that 58% had developed their own metrics. So that talk about the need for some consistency, some standardization, avoiding reinventing the wheel, avoiding duplicating resources and so on, is really live in this case from the provider perspective. And finally, the collaboration point, I think this was interesting. So we asked commissioners, and 96% of them said they'd engaged with providers and users, which was a high total, but obviously we believe the commissioners. There's a lot of trust, as Matt talked about earlier. Actually, when we asked the providers, it was a little bit lower. And I think there is something there for us. It's partly what underpins why we've done this event. Actually, we know that it's not just about our sector, and it's not just about the commissioners, and it's not just about the private sector. It is genuinely about the interplay between all three. I think clearly we have still some work to do, and I hope that tomorrow we can start to work towards some of the answers and towards some of the tangible actions and recommendations that each of those different sectors can do to push this stuff forward. Thank you very much.